Well, hello, and thank you for joining me. You honor me with your presence. I'm so glad you're here. We're into our second study now on the book of Genesis, the fall. And we have a lot to cover tonight, so we're going to get right to it. Genesis, the fall. We had this perfect world set up in the first two chapters of Genesis, and then things begin to fall apart. And we'll look at that as we go forward with this lesson. One of the things we're going to be doing for the Patreon exclusive, we're going to cover this question: did Eve wander off? And you'll see they're both in quotes, and there's a good reason for that, but that's for those who want to be patrons and help support this ministry. Otherwise, we'll move right along. And we start with our memory text. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. This is, as they say, the evangelion, the first proclamation of the gospel. The sin has come and has brought trouble, but there will be a reckoning. The serpent and the sin problem will be bruised in the head, will be destroyed. Down the line, the details are not here, just the general idea. But it's already here. As soon as sin comes, God has hope. And of course, we know that the Lamb was slain from the foundation of the world. So the plan was in place. We're going to look at this and some other things we go forward that we need to go very rapidly tonight. Genesis. There are two fundamental parts to the book of Genesis. And this should be covered. If you're going to study the book of Genesis, you need to know what it's made up of. The first section, which is where we are right now, of course, is primeval history, the origins of everything we experience. How did the world get to be here? How did we get to be in the world? Why is there death? A whole list of things that we want to know take place and are explained by this primeval history. And the primeval history runs roughly from Genesis 1 to somewhere around Genesis 10 or 11. I say this because it's not really the primeval history. Is about the world that was, the world of the flood, and the consequences of the flood. And then it runs through the Tower of Babel, which shows that the flood was not a final solution. And then we come to Abraham, and that's the second part of the book, which is the stories of the patriarchs. And it starts with Abraham being chosen, and it ends with Israel and Egypt. So as we're going along, keep these two basic parts of Genesis. There's primeval history, and then there's the stories of the patriarchs. And they are not only linked, they're very important. There's a reason they come in this first book. The created order. Now, the created order, as we saw it in Genesis 1, is God, who is the ruler of heaven and earth. Then, next under that would be humankind. The man and the woman were co-rulers and co-stewards of the earth. Notice they don't rule heaven at all. The greater light and the lesser light are said to rule the day and the night, these bodies in the heavens. So God is the creator of heaven and earth and rules over all, but he's given to humankind stewardship and the privilege of being co-rulers over the earth. And finally, then we have the animal kingdom, and beneath that we have plants and so forth. But basically, this is the created order. And order is important. That's what his creation is about. It's God taking this mixed up mess. There was soil, but it was covered by water, and it was only water. There was no place for animals to live, no place for humans to live, no air to breathe. It was just this mess, and he slowly brings order to it. There's night and day. The waters are divided. The dry land appears, and so forth. And he continues to bring order and then to fill it with life. So that's the created order. Now, the serpent was most cunning of all beasts of the field the Lord God had made. This is from Robert Alter's translation of Genesis. The serpent was the most cunning of all beasts of the field that the Lord God had made. Cunning, that's a very interesting term, especially in a perfect world. But the serpent was looked on as being, perhaps we might say, at the top of the animal kingdom. It was the most cunning of all beasts. And so maybe he's the chief animal in some sense being presented here. But there's something else going on here, and that is that the serpent, most human beings are not really fond of snakes. I count myself among them. But the serpent figures prominently in ancient creation stories. In fact, we'll get into that, but I did get into that, why there was a creation story to begin with and all that in that Patreon exclusive. But the serpent is often the symbol of evil in the created order. The serpent is this negative evil power that the good power has to fight against in order to create. But of course, none of that takes place in Genesis. Nevertheless, it was in the minds and in the culture surrounding the people who received the book of Genesis. So they would have been aware of this. And that means that, as John Walton says in his book, The Lost World of Adam and Eve, the minute the serpent shows up, the serpent would have been viewed as a chaos creature because, again, the sea is chaotic. The waves are sometimes mountainous, and they go this way and that way, and there's no controlling them, and it just seems totally to the ancient mind. And if you've spent much time on the water, it's going to be the same thing there. That it can be very, very chaotic, and it's uncontrollable, and it's sinister. And so the serpent, and often in these creation myths, it was a sea serpent. It was a water serpent. The serpent would have been viewed as a chaos creature from the non-ordered realm, the sea, and that this was promoting disorder. In other words, the ancient person reading this book or hearing this story would say, the minute he hears the serpent is most cunning and is in the garden, he'd say, uh-oh, that might be trouble. Just like, somebody with a black hat in a Western, for example. So there we are. The serpent was the most cunning of all the beasts the Lord that God had made. And he said to the woman, though God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden. Notice he does not say it exactly right, because he wants to correct. He wants to find out where the woman is. What does she understand about this? And the woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the garden's trees we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it, and you shall not touch it, lest you die. Now notice that the tree that they can't eat from is in the midst of the garden. In fact, when we talk about did Eve wander off, it turns out that both the tree of knowledge and of good and evil and the tree of life were in the midst of the garden. They were in the middle. So think about that and what that means about wandering off. It's right smack in the middle. God has said, you shall not eat from it, and you shall not touch it, lest you die. Now, God did not say you should not touch it, but at least as far as we know, there's no record of it in Scripture. So this is her addition, again, in Scripture, in this text. And so it's probably, it's a human caution. We talk about guarding the edges of the Sabbath, for example. If you don't touch it, you won't eat from it. That was the idea. So don't, placing another barrier around it. But the serpent does something interesting. Remember, he was the most cunning of that. And the serpent said to the woman, you shall not be doomed to die. Now notice this isn't, when the death is not immediate. It is like receiving a terminal diagnosis from your doctor. It's receiving a death sentence in a court. That's being doomed to die. And there was never a claim that they would die immediately. The claim was that death would come into the world and would eventually take them. For God knows that on the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will become as gods, knowing good and evil. So it's an interesting temptation that is made here. It is not some terrible thing. It is some good thing, you know. God is good. Don't you want to be like God? But this is not just being like God. This is being equal to God. We're going to look at this. So remember the created order. We had God, we had humankind, and the animals in that order. But look what happens. Remember, the serpent is the agent of disorder. The serpent is the chaos being. And what's going to happen to God's order? Well, first of all, the first thing we discover is that the animals and God are all kind of mixed up because the serpent knows what God knows. God knows the difference between good and evil, and you will too. So the serpent knows what God knows, what God has not told human beings. Now, of course, he did not know what God knew. But the point is, he's bringing disorder. If the serpent is equal to God, then he must be above humankind. The fact that he knows the serpent, this part of the animal kingdom, knows things that Eve does not know, means that he's somehow smarter than she is. He's more cunning than she is. He knows what God knows. And then he says, not only, and this is implied, but not only do I know what God knows, but you can know too. We can all be equal. And what has happened to the ordered realm that God created is it's been all thrown together again. It's disorder. So it's like everything in your house, instead of being organized, you throw it together in a heap. Okay? You separate things, you put things in discrete categories, you store them separately, and so forth. And you do that to create order, so that you have order in your life. Well, the created order is being brought into disorder by the serpent, by this chaos agent. So that's the first thing. And in fact, that is the first key of understanding this lesson. And as God brought order in life, but the serpent brings disorder and death. They were not surely dead. They didn't die that day, but they were doomed to die. He lied about that. He told the truth in one way, that they would know evil. They hadn't known evil before. They'd only known good, but now they're going to know evil, and they're going to experience it firsthand. And what they didn't realize is that it isn't something necessarily that you want to know. And interestingly, we also have the second key here, because we talked about this previously, and that is coveting is the 10th commandment. It's what sets the 10 commandments apart from all the other commandments, because it's a desire for something that does not belong to you, and that you are willing to do whatever it takes to get it. And even so, in this case, it seems relatively simple, but Eve coveted God's status, because that's what she was offered. You will know what God knows. And so the second key to understanding this lesson is that coveting God's status is the real forbidden fruit. The fruit is largely irrelevant. By the way, it probably wasn't an apple. Scholars think maybe it was a pomegranate. Who knows for sure? The interesting way that it happens that it came to be the apple is that the word for evil and the word for apple are the same word in Latin. Malus, M-A-L-U-S. Anyway, so that's there you are. There was a mal thing, a bad thing, but it also was an apple, at least in the Latin imagination. Whatever it was, the fruit was irrelevant. It was desiring God's status, coveting his status, and being willing to go against his word to get it. Well, of course, then we come to the consequences of sin. And the consequences of sin are very interesting. Death is a part of it. So the first thing it is, he comes into the garden. They're hiding because they know that they're naked and they haven't seen it before. And since they haven't, and I didn't say they weren't naked, but they didn't recognize it, they didn't perceive it, but their perception has changed. And for some reason, they don't want God to see them this way. They think that this is not good. The change in their status is what has them worry. That's what they can, and the visible evidence is They're not clothed in any way. So God came, and first of all, God says, "Where are you, Adam?" But of course, God knows where Adam is. And we need to understand that Jesus and God throughout the Bible never ask a question to which they don't know the answer. The question is asked because Adam doesn't really know the answer. He needs to go through this process of realizing why he's doing this. Well, we hid from you. And God said to them, well, who told you that you were naked? From the tree I commanded you not to eat, have you eaten? Now, this is Robert Alter's translation, and he's trying to keep this in the sounding as much like the Hebrew as the original. So there it is. From the tree I commanded you not to eat, have you eaten? So this is how you found out. I mean, this is what he's saying. And here is what Adam says. And the human said, the woman you gave by me, she gave me the tree, from the tree, and I ate. So, God, it's your fault. You gave me the woman. And by the way, until this time, in first 2 chapters of Genesis, we have humankind, which is embracing both male and female. And one of the reasons I talk about it, and you'll look at this in the Did Eve Wander Off, is that Eve, in chapter 3, when she partakes of the fruit, is not yet named Eve. She's the woman. Because in chapters 1 and 2, the woman and the man are considered to be one. It's like our own laws. If I run up debts, my wife owes them too. If she runs up debts, I owe them too. We're both responsible. We both own certain things together. What one does, the other is deemed to have done. And that's the way this is in the first 2 chapters of Genesis, that they are one. But there's no more oneness. That's already gone by the side, because he says, well, it was the woman's fault. Instead of saying, we did this, it's she did this. I was okay, but she did this. So the oneness that had been inherent in their relationship was broken. And that is a tragedy, just to begin with, right there. And the Lord God said to the woman, what is this you have done? And the woman said, the serpent beguiled me, and I ate. And so as Adam says, it was the woman's fault, the woman says, well, it was the serpent's fault. But what happens is, and Alter talks about that the humankind were given to a 2-part commission, which we'll look at. And one is that they were to hold sway, or the King James says to have dominion, to be rulers over humankind. But here, we already have a reversal of this order that we mentioned and we pointed out previously, because the creation that created the serpent, who is merely an animal, over whom the human beings are supposed to have dominion, are supposed to rule, he has deceived her and overruled human beings. So in this way, creation began to hold sway over humankind. I think this is hinted at by Paul. I believe it's in Romans, where he talks about, instead of worshiping God, they worship the creation. And everything's turned upside down. And that upside down turning, you're seeing right here. We already explored it a little bit earlier, but you're seeing it also right here, because she says, hey, the serpent outsmarted me. So instead of having dominion, we'd given up dominion to the serpent. We collected one. One does, the other is deemed to have done. They were one until this happened. And now there's responsibility and a price to be paid. It's like, oh, no, it's not me, it's her. It was the serpent, it was whatever. And ultimately, it's God. So, in seeking to become like God, well, we'll see what happens. There's a consequence. There's a price to pay in seeking to become like God, because human beings were not supposed to be like God. And we don't want to be. I've said many times, I'm sure that people are, if you think about it at all, you're perfectly glad that I am not God, that every whim of mine, every thought of mine doesn't change reality and wreak havoc on creation. And I'm glad you're not God. There's only one who's wise enough to be God. And but here we had to learn it the hard way. So here you are. The man is confronted by God. Where are you? And he speaks to the man, and the man says, "Well, we're hiding." And, "Well, have you eaten of the fruit, the tree of which I told you not to eat? Have you eaten it?" And the man says, "Well, it was the woman's fault." And the woman said, "It was the serpent's fault." So you see this transference of responsibility. I'm not responsible. No, 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 no. And ultimately, it is saying here that humankind had surrendered to the created beings, to the animals over which they were supposed to rule. So they had already failed and abdicated, if you will, their responsibility to rule over the animal kingdom. And the admission is right here. Here are the consequences. And it's interesting. Let's go back here just a minute. The man, the woman, the serpent. And they're going to be dealt with in exactly the opposite direction. The man, the woman, and the serpent. So we're going to be dealt with this. The serpent will be punished, or the curse on the serpent will be first, the curse on the woman, the curse on the man, in that order. Now, I don't have a diagram here, but you can figure out that this is a chiasm. It begins and ends with the man. The woman is second, and second from the last, and the serpent's in the center. And the purpose of this is saying the serpent and the agent they're using, the Satan, although they did not yet, this early on was not really a concept of the devil or Satan, but the serpent was responsible, the agent of the enemy of souls. The serpent is the one who's responsible. That's why he's in the middle. That's why he's in the middle of the chiasm. So he's dealt with first. God says, because you've done this. Cursed be you of all cattle and of all beasts of the field. It goes on some here. I'm just cutting it out so that we can fit it onto a page and get it into something. Enmity will I set between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. He will bite your head, or he will boot your head. That's right. He will kick it, and you will bite his heel. So it's going to be not good. And of course, everything had been good until then. Now it's not good. And the serpent, because he took the position we demonstrated of the top of all beasts, now he's cursed above all beasts, and he has to crawl on his belly and so forth. That's what's the rest of this curse, the consequence of sin. And the consequence of sin is that there will be enmity. Now, of course, this partially explains why so few people like snakes. There's an inherent dislike of snakes in the human race. But the real purpose here is not talking about humans and snakes. The real thing that's being talked about here is about humankind and the one who used the serpent, Lucifer. That there's the great controversy which had been in heaven as taking place now, and there's going to be this fight. There's going to be this conflict. It's going to go on and on and on, because the Holy Spirit will be striving with us to help us to do what is right, and the devil will be striving with us to do the opposite. And this conflict will go on, and eventually, here's the proto-evangel, because one of her seed will be Christ, and he will crush the serpent's head. He will make the serpent no longer viable. He will bite his heel, and of course, if a poisonous snake bites your heel, it could kill you. Certain snakes, it would. And there will be this ultimate battle between the good and the evil, but the one that will prevail will be the one who crushes the other's head. And that's what is being promised here. So, first, now remember that the man was confronted first, then the woman, or the man. God came to the man, and then he asked the woman. The man said the woman did it. God asked the woman said the serpent did it. So the serpent gets it first. The serpent's in the center of the chiasm, and the serpent is the one who first is punished and gets the curse. Now he goes to the woman, because he's taking it in reverse order. To the woman he said, I will terribly sharpen your birth pangs. In pain shall you bear children, and for your man shall be your longing, and he shall rule over you. Now, and this is one of the things I want to make a point of, because it's really important to understand. There was no ruling over before the fall. They were one, and it's very complexly spelled out in the Hebrew, where sometimes the word Adam means mankind, and sometimes it means the male. But and sometimes he created them. Adam, he created them, and so it can be humankind. It can be all encompassing. But here's the first time we see the conflict, the war between the sexes, we call it. Here is the first time we see ruling over you. And when we insist in our generation that men should be rulers, whether it's in church or at home, and I'm not saying that there aren't times when a person has to make decisions. What I'm saying is that this is a product of the curse. And when we insist on maintaining that, we're perpetuating the curse, instead of saying, let's find a way to work together. And then, when I got married many years ago, I thought, the man has to be the leader, the man, for various reasons. I was very young then, fortunately. And I have come to see that in certain areas, my wife needs to take the lead, because she is better at it than I am. And that in all things, it should be as mutual as possible. I say as possible because we're sinful beings, and it's difficult for us to get along with anybody, including the person that is most intimate with us. But the point is, we don't want to perpetuate the curse. We don't want to. And as Jesus said, in the beginning it was not so. That's his standard. And in the new earth it will not be so. That's very clear. And if we are striving to live kingdom life, to live the life of the new earth in the now, then we do not want to be perpetuating the conditions of the curse. Some we cannot reverse, but some we can, or at least we can attempt to, we can aspire to. And this is one of them. There was no ruling over by one or the other before the fall. After the fall, yes. And I'm not saying that it should be that. I'm saying that's where the conflict came from. The conflict that existed in the universe between Christ and Satan now becomes the conflict between man and wife sometimes. And there it is. And we just have to learn how to deal with it, and also learn to honor each other. And to the human he said, because you listened to the voice of your wife and ate from the tree that I commanded you, you shall not eat it. Okay? And this is because he listened to his wife, not because it was a bad thing to listen to your wife, but because he listened to his wife instead of God. It's right there. You listened to the voice of your wife and ate from the tree that I commanded you. You shall not eat from it. So the conflict is not whether you should listen to your wife or whether a man should listen to his wife. The question is, should either spouse listen to their mate instead of listening to God? That's the problem. There's a clear indication. It's not always the case, but here is a clear indication. You must not eat of this tree. You shall not eat from it. And you listen to her instead of me. That's the problem here. And here it is. Fascinating. Look at this. It's very long. Cursed be the soil for your sake. Why is the soil being cursed for his sake? With pangs shall you eat from it. Do you remember that word pangs? It showed up earlier in the chapter. All the days of your life, thorn and thistle shall it sprout for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. This is the first time we really understood that would happen. There was fruit and everything. It did say that everything bearing seed and so forth, but basically it was not going to be a struggle to eat in the garden in the perfect world before the fall, but now it was going to be effort. You shall eat of the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow shall you eat bread till you return to the soil, For from there you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Because one of the problems, or a central issue, if you will, in this whole fall is seeking to be more than we were made to be. God made us from the dust and made us to be his loved children and his co-rulers on this earth, but that was not enough. We wanted to be like God. Same temptation that Lucifer fell for. And because we wanted to be more than dust, we'd become more than dust because God breathed the breath of life into us. But because we tried to be more than that, we are returned to dust. And that's the issue. That's why the soil is where Adam came from. And so rather than cursing Adam directly, he curses the soil. The soil, the entire earth now, is in rebellion. We saw how that the serpent brings disorder. You saw the collapsing of the order that God had made. And the same thing is taking place here. He's just simply saying this is what's going to happen. And it's interesting because we have this, notice the soil, and it has it, but it's talking about the soil and dust, and dust. The dust is the soil. So this is all about that. This is all about man, as Robert Alter translates it, the human made from humus. It's a wonderful way of expressing it, showing the similarity in Hebrew between the name Adam and the earth, the soil of the earth, Adamah. And so there you are. Dust, soil shall be, we're dust, and we're going to return to it because being God's children wasn't enough. We will be returned to what we were before. It's a sad thing. There's where death for humanity comes in. God had made dust into mankind. Mankind seeking to be like God instead assured is returning to dust. And of course, we're all guilty of this. We all do the same thing. God had commissioned mankind to tend the earth and to care for it. That was in Genesis 2. And now it'll have to have the soil that we were to take care of is cursed because of our behavior, and with pangs we shall eat from it. So we were commissioned to tend the earth and care for it. This was to have been a joyful duty, but it now becomes a painful one with pangs. The other thing that mankind was commissioned to do was to be fruitful and multiply. And the woman who is going to give birth, I will terribly sharpen your birth pangs. Same word in Hebrew. And again, I've been present at the birth of all my children and seen others very soon after they're born. Mothers go through a lot, but the joy of the child is what they're looking for. Well, imagine before the curse here, and it was something we brought on ourselves, the curse is here, is the consequence of our sin. There was only the joy. There was not the pangs. That's the way it was intended to be. In fact, everything in our commission was intended to fulfill us, to make us joyful, to give us a true sense of being worthy and worthwhile. Just as anytime we accomplish something, we feel good about it. Then fulfilling the commission was something that we were supposed to do, and it would bring us great joy. But now, because we had rejected the role that God had given us by wanting to be like God, we still had the same duties, but now they weren't going to be as much fun. Now there was going to be pain involved. There's going to be sweat. There were going to be conflict. And that's the consequences of sin. There you are. Both of those things would be filled with pangs and difficulty. And so the commission that was given at the beginning becomes more difficult for us to fulfill. And that is the third key understanding about the fall. That the commission it was meant to be joyful and was meant to be fulfilling, is now going to be difficult and filled with pain and filled with effort that would not have been necessary except for our rejection of our status. So there we are. The three keys to the fall are understanding that God brought order in life. The serpent brings disorder and death. And the forbidden fruit is coveting God's status. That's what the serpent tempted us to do. And it's what we still want to do. I still want to run the world. I want to run the universe. And finally, the commission becomes more difficult because we rejected our place. Then we still have that place, but now we have to fight for it. We have to work hard for it. We have to suffer pangs for it. So that is the message. These are the three keys to understanding the fall. Now, the fall is much more complex, and there's a lot more to it. I mentioned last week we will soon have up all the videos of these the exclusives, and the one that we're talking about this time is, did Eve wander off? And that'll be the exclusive specifically relating to the fall. But there will be others. There are others that are going to be up there, and we'll continue having these exclusives. There's not enough time. I really don't want to ever go beyond 35 minutes on these. And so we've taken more time, and we've just scratched the surface. So one of the ways that I'd make up for it is to make this available to those who are really interested in it. Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this time with me. I hope this has been a blessing to you. I hope it gives you a new understanding and a greater appreciation of God's grace from the beginning, and understanding why we are where we are. And I hope that in a few days, you will be able to join me again for another Bible journey together. Until then, may God bless you.